Welcome to the MAM Journals. The Rocket 3 in this format, the first one was in the 60s, was actually first introduced in 2003 in America and then had a launch in Europe in 2004. It was an interesting bike. It won Motorcycle News's Bike of the Year because it was so very different. I did actually ride one and it was fun, if a little one-dimensional. 20 years on, this bike has progressed enormously, as you'd expect. It's a much more powerful bike than the original when it was launched. It's actually slightly lighter and it has phenomenal performance. It's actually 2.5 litres now as opposed to the 2.3 that it was originally launched in. And it is the largest production engine of a motorcycle in the world. It also, when we go to the specs, the most torque. Now, some of you may be familiar with the phrase crossover, and when manufacturers use it, they normally mean that it's a bike that is sort of got a foot in both camps. It does more than what it just appears to do. And these super cruisers are probably a good example of that. I went to the website and thought, well, what do Triumph call it? And it's interesting because they've got adventure bikes, they've got classics, they've got sports bikes, they've got roadsters, and this is in a section of its own. And it sort of is in a section of its own, although in their description they describe it as a roadster. But clearly not the same sort of roadster as their other roadsters. Now, what I'm going to try and do during the course of this video is find out, well, what sort of cruiser roadster is it? And we'll do it in the usual format. We'll go through the specifications, we'll go for a ride, and I'll come back and give you my concluding thoughts. As always, I hope that you enjoy the video. Right, so let's start with the specifications. I'm going to try and be quite prompt on this one because as I'll explain later, the GoPro riding is a bit longer than usual. The engine is a 2,458 cc, it's an inline 3, it's liquid cooled, 12 valve with a double overhead cam. It produces 180 horsepower at 7,000, and I mentioned the very first one came out, that was 120 to give you an idea, and it produces the most torque of any production motorcycle at 225 Newton meters of torque at 4,000 revs. You can see the rad and the oil cooler here. This is a stainless steel exhaust, powder coated black. They describe it as a 3-exit silencer. The more observant amongst you will go, well, it's gone to 2, but there's actually one on the other side. We'll stick a photo in there so you can actually see where it comes out. It's quite low. It's a shaft drive bike with a 6-speed gearbox. You have an option on it to have a quick shifter. Okay, so let's go to the front of the bike. It's fitted with a 17-inch wheel, a 3.5-inch width, and it's in cast aluminium. The rim is fitted with a 150/80 R17. The bike has got twin 320mm discs and Brembo M432 calipers. They're Stalamar, I think they're called. And that they are top of the range Brembo radial brakes, and they're pretty good, quite impressive. Mind you need it with a £700 bike. So I'd say monoblock calipers, and the bike has got optimized cornering ABS, which tells me it's got a 6-axis IMU. It's fitted with these Showa 47mm front forks, upside down as usual. It's got compression and rebound adjustments on the top, and the travel is about 120 millimeters of travel on this front suspension unit. Whilst we're just looking at the front, I quite like this styling feature here with these twin headlamps. It is very Triumph-esque, and I think in keeping with the character of the bike. Obviously a number of manufacturers over the years have done that dual headlock, and I always like it. CBR Hondas, Suzuki Gixxers. I think it's a nice styling point. Haven't tried it at night, but I'd be surprised if the lights weren't good. Okay, so going to the rear of the bike, it's fitted with a 16-inch times 7.5-inch width, and it's again cast aluminium. It's got a single disc on this side here. That's a 300mm discs, and it's got Brembos on. Sometimes people put Brembos on the front but not on the back, but I mean, they clearly want this thing to stop, and as I say, it does. It's got a 4-piston monoblock in there, and again this 6-axis IMU effect, which I sort of touched on in a few other videos. Pitch, roll and yaw, thrust, heave and sway are the axes. So in other words, it's got a gyroscope in there, tells you where it is, and an accelerometer which tells you how fast it's doing whatever it's doing. But impressive technology. This is a nice touch down here while we can see it. It's a fully adjustable piggyback unit here on the back. It's a shower unit, and the adjustment is actually on the other side, but here you've got the preload adjuster, which is just a twist. Clicking in like that, which is no, I like that on a feature bike. It's easy to change and easy to get at. At the rear has 107mm of travel. It's got, whilst we're here, you can see it's got a single-sided, that's cast aluminium swing arm. Neat job. Bit tight in here for cleaning and things and various things, but I'll talk about that on aesthetics. It cleans up nicely, but it's quite tricky to get at because it's a bit tight hand-wise to do it. And I can see I've missed a bit on the wheel. There you go. I'll have to sort that out later. Okay, so if we stand back and look at it, get a feel for the dimensions and what it's all about. It's actually got full aluminium frame. I think one of the reasons they've managed to reduce weight over time as opposed to put it on is they've been clever with the use of materials. The wheelbase is a massive 1.677 meters long, so it's a big thing. This seat height is 773 millimeters. It's interesting, on the video I watched, which was very good, the Triumph actually are better than most in terms of the videos that they provide on their website to talk about the bike. They describe it as 750, so that might be a different seat configuration, but the spec on the bike that I've checked is 773. And it's got this pillion. The more observant amongst you will go, well, there's nowhere to put your feet. And this is quite a neat touch, look. Folds out. There's some nice little design features on this, and you've got to respect the sort of thought that's gone into it. The tank is an 18-litre tank, and I'll talk a bit more about that. When we film the dash, I'll just show you inside it, because there's something I want to mention when we go for a ride. That's 18 litres is 3.95 gallons, and again, I'll talk to you about consumption as we go. If you look at the top here, this is nicely done. This is this sort of Monza look with the offset cap and this strap down the middle. It's nicely done in this brushed aluminium, and actually they match these with the coolant and the oil filter cap. So again, nice attention to detail. Okay, so I like the controls. They're nice, and it's comparatively uncluttered for a bike that has got a lot of technology on it. It's nice and simple to use. Again, I'll refer to that when we go for a ride. I'm going to turn it on, activate it, and you can see it's coming up on the screen. You can actually personalise this, nice little touch. You can actually put your name on there if you want to put, make the dash personal to you. So it's come up on the standard screen. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the home button, and that's going to take us into some of the options. I won't go through all of them. You've got riding modes. It's got 4 riding modes on it. It's got rain, road, sport, and then personalisation. You've got bike setup. The toggle switches over here. This is a 5-way toggle. So you sort of go down, I'll press bike setup, so press the tick, fairly logical, and you can see you've got various options. I'll just show a couple of those, cursor down. Hill hold, do you want that on or off? Just twist in enabled, as I've used it for that. Indicators, do you want them automatic or manual? Do you want your traction control on? I'd say yes. And obviously your servicing details, and then you can come back out of that, press home, and you're back to your screen. You've got various, well, 2 display options on it. I do show you when we're out about one of the other options, which is a little bit busy for me personally, but a bit more traditional. This is a really clear TFT, and it's obvious what revs you're doing, which is useful on a bike like this, not useful on most bikes in fairness, and a very clear speedo indication, because whatever speed you think you're doing, you'll probably be doing a bit more. It does go very well. Fuel gauge, and you can see that this symbol up here, in the way that it's currently set, is showing you the modes. But if I press mode, you can see you've got road, road there, rain. Sorry, I'll hold that down. You can see I'm cursing down, and wherever the red light goes, you just press the button and tick it in. So if I want to change it, I'm now in rider mode with that. If I just tick that, you can see I'm in rider mode, so I could set up air conditions. It is very intuitive and nice and straightforward. Nice dash. I like the clarity of it. If you want different bits showing, then you just press across so it can tell you. You can see I've done 40 miles a gallon on the journey that I've did, and it's virtually full, a 140-mile range. I talk about them when we go out. Temperatures, different light settings, how many miles you've done on the trip. Again, all these things as you'd expect on a modern bike, and easy to read, easy to look at. While I'm here, I do talk about when we go out for a ride. This is the cruise control, which is standard on this bike, and something I don't talk about, heated grips. This is actually, some heated grips can be a bit of a dance of the 7 veils to get them to work, but I actually really like this. It's simple. Press once, you're on hot. Press twice, you're on medium. Press 3, you got a little bit of heat, and then off. That perfect, straightforward when you're riding. Again, I don't talk about when we go out. These mirrors, you'd look at them and think, well, that's just a design feature. They're surprisingly clear. Well, up to the speeds at which you're taking your license in your hands anyway. I was quite impressed with them. I didn't think I would be, but I was. This screen does a bit more than you think. You'd think it's purely aesthetic, but again, riding experience. I talked about earlier about the radial brakes. It's got master cylinder, radial master cylinder up here as well. Brembo, obviously. You can see it's straight in there. They've used some really good quality components on building this bike. This is a flagship bike for them, and they treated it as such. Okay, I've been fairly short with the technical specifications, but I hope I've given you a flavour of what it's got. And obviously, if you ever end up owning one of these, you'll work your way through it in the normal way. But it is a well-equipped, electronics are good. Now, the reason why I was a bit shorter is because our GoPro footage is a bit longer. And the reason why it's a bit longer is I normally, if you watch the channel, I normally have a very sort of tight narrative about what I want to say. I've tried something different this time. I've just tried to make bullet points and talk as I go and watch the film. Please let me know which one you prefer. It'd be helpful for me to try and make videos that you like watching. Anyway, enough of all that. Let's go for a ride. Most of you will know that when I ride the bikes and make these videos, I like to ride the bike a day before without any sort of cameras and just familiarise myself with it. And indeed, this is the case with this one. I actually did 120 miles the day before in typical British weather, rain, and it was surprisingly good. Lots of torque and heavy weight aren't synonymous with great grip, but it is ridden sensibly, quite secure, and I enjoyed it. Today the forecast was better, although, as is often the case, they lied a bit, but I was heading up north, and this particular town is Woodstock. The estate on the left-hand side is actually the Blenheim estate. It's 12,000 acres. It's a World Heritage Site, and it's got several sites of special scientific interest, SSSIs as they're referred to. Normally when I'm riding through town, one of the things I'm trying to highlight on the bike is what sort of gears it's comfortable in the 20 and 30 changeable limits that are synonymous in towns today. So I did do that, but to be honest, there's little point in talking about which gears, because with torque like this, the bike doesn't care what gear it's in, as long as you're not trying to do 10 mile an hour in 6th, it will tolerate anything. It's got so much torque and is so flexible. The low speed handling is very secure, it felt nice and precise, and it's got a very smooth throttle response. The bike feels balanced, and it is actually easy to get your foot down. Now, some of you will have noticed with that foot forward position and may have looked at it and think, well, I don't really like that sort of style. Just so you know, on this particular bike, if it is of interest to you, you can actually get an adaptation kit and move it to a more central position in the usual way, because with the foot forward you do have to sort of plan a bit ahead, because your feet need to come back and then down, not just a single one moment movement. It is with a low seat height. Once you've got your feet down, you've got very good full contact. Certainly at my height, I'm no Goliath, and it felt very secure. The steering lock is actually quite limited, but again, that low seat and good foot contact means it is actually easy to manoeuvre because you've got plenty of leverage. I did do a little bit of filtering on the bike when I had it during the period of time, and it's quite a big bike, so I wasn't sort of rushing in between rows of cars enthusiastically, but I suspect it's a bike that once you've got used to the dimensions of it, it'll be perfectly happy doing that. We've all seen Harley Davidsons come screaming up between the two rows of stationary traffic, and if you can do it on a Harley Davidson, you'll definitely be able to do it on one of these. I made my way past Chipping Norton, heading north towards the Piston Club, and there was one particular road I was hoping that I'll get clear and relatively dry, but the devil plays with the best laid plans. It was greasy rather than full-on wet, and I did get stuck behind a car, but at least it demonstrates the fantastic overtaking ability of this bike and this engine. I was determined to ride it in sports mode, whatever the weather was, because I'd ridden it in road the day before, and the sports mode does help the handling of the bike. It obviously changes the mapping of the ECU, so the power comes in slightly quicker, and it does firm it up quite a bit, probably firmer than some would like, and you wouldn't want to be sort of bouncing it around on potholes with that firm suspension, because it could get quite exciting. But it definitely helped it turn. This bike is a 1.677 metres long and weighs 700 pounds, and it's not naturally going to be quick turning. I actually thought the tyres were okay, and as I say, I was pleasantly surprised by how well it coped with wet conditions, bearing in mind the weight and work it's got to do, and the handling in the damp was good as well. It was surprisingly secure. So after my usual coffee and the obligatory photograph, I then made my way towards Fish Hill. I do regularly ride this hill, sometimes more enthusiastically than others, but on a bike like this and new to me, I was pretty gentle with it. I always laugh because if I'm anywhere within the area, say within 10 miles, and I see an ambulance sort of flashing somewhere, I know it's coming here, because it is a hill that catches a few out and you can vanish into the undergrowth when you run out of ground clearance. The ground clearance on this bike was actually surprisingly high, which told me that this bike is designed to handle certainly better than my perception of a traditional cruiser. This bike, and in fairness are both capable of going up this hill much faster than this, and I think if I had it a month or so, I would probably be a little bit more enthusiastic than I am today. My friend's got a couple of cruisers, and when we go out for rides, occasionally I sort of pop behind him and just watch what he's doing, and I've always been pleasantly surprised by how he can hustle it along. He does a good job with it, but I do notice that he's very precise on his lines, and when you ride them you sort of know why. I've got a Suzuki GSX 750R, and that is, when I get enthusiastic with it, is so forgiving, it's unbelievable. If you get your line wrong, and it almost sort of says to you, would you like another go? Well, these sort of, I would call them performance cruisers, I suspect you're not going to get another go. So I think it's quite important to sort of know the bike well before we start pressing on with it, because it is about precision. It will do it if you do it right. Having made my way up Fish Hill, I made my way to Stow-on-the-Wold, and then I took the A361 to Burford, which is, It's a lovely road. I've been riding it for 40 years. I know the lines really well, if not where the potholes are, and I thought that might be a good opportunity. But the traffic had other ideas. Now, sometimes when I get along this road and I'm stuck in rows of traffic, I can get a little bit frustrated with it because I think it's such a nice road to do it. But I didn't get frustrated on this bike, and I think that's really because it is a proper cruiser, a bike that you can relax, just enjoy the countryside and bimble along in comfort. Now, I haven't actually ridden this road for a while, so I was interested to see that they'd actually brought in the winter wheat. Well, for those of you that are interested in such things, winter wheat is wheat that's planted in the fall and harvested in the summer, and they like winter wheat because it's high in protein and they use it in bread and pasta. Spring wheat is, as the name implies, planted in the spring and harvested in the fall. I suspect this year, whatever time they've planted it, it's going to be high in moisture content, so all the farmers I know will be complaining about how much they'd had to use their dryers to get the moisture out of the wheat before they can sell it. But anyway, back to the real world. So anyway, I made my way along the A361 and you eventually arrive at Burford, which is sometimes called the gateway to the Cotswolds, although in this case from this direction I'm going out the gateway rather than in it, as the Cotswolds are behind me. I know this town very well. It's part of my childhood, and if you can see on the left hand side, there's a Georgian building there with the windows bricked up. Now that was actually as a result of a window tax that was introduced by William III in 1690. In those days it was kings that ran out of money, not governments, and it was clearly targeted at the bigger houses. Not surprisingly, some of the parliamentarians at the time, who tended to live in bigger houses, were not most impressed, and they described it in Parliament as daylight robbery. So if ever you wondered where that phrase came from, you now know. In my well-spent youth, this town wasn't quite as genteel as it is nowadays, and I can remember mono-wheeling my RD 400 up this hill and then chucking it into the roundabout at the top. So, but I'm different now, and time waits for no man, and I think society's different as well. It was, in those days, it was almost considered sort of slightly high spirits by most, but nowadays it would definitely be considered hooliganism. The bike is easier to ride up the hill in what is now a 20-mile-an-hour limit. I then wanted to take the bike on a bit of dual carriageway and demonstrate its sort of dual carriageway capabilities and cruising capabilities. As we're coming up to the roundabout, before I enter the dual carriageway, there's a pub on the left hand side called the Windmill, and those of you that follow Clarkson's farm may know that he's recently purchased a pub. This is the pub that he's purchased on the A40, and I suspect it's going to be an absolute tourist hotspot when they finally get it refurbed, and they're working on it now. So onto the bypass. The bike accelerates fantastically, as you'd expect with this sort of 225 newton meters of torque, which is going to do nothing else but accelerate well, and the bike cruises really comfortably at 70 miles an hour, about 2,600 revs. It's got an easy to operate cruise control, better than some of the others on different bikes, because it's all done on one switch, and it deactivates in the usual way. Touch the gears, touch the brakes, close the throttle, and it knocks it out, and then just resumes by single press of the same button. So nice and easy to use. The wind noise on the bike is, you can definitely hear it, you can possibly hear it on the video, but it's not buffeting you, and the front screen is keeping some of the main wind away from you. I was actually very impressed with the bike at legalish speeds along these faster strips, because you'd expect with a bike like this, that sort of level of power, it'd be pulling your arms out, but actually it isn't. The ergonomics are very clever on this bike. the weight and seating position means that your body's taking the strain, not your arms. You can actually see in one little stretch, I just literally opened my hand so I'm holding it with my thumbs, just demonstrating how little grip you actually need to ride this at, I was riding slightly faster than they were recommending, but not over the 100 mph, which the police get a little bit agitated about if they happen to be nearby. But the bike does 145 mph. I suspect by the time you got to that it will be pulling your arms out, but at brisk speeds, very sensible, surprisingly comfortable. I think it's probably sensible to talk about touring on the bike. Is that one of its capabilities? And some of you will have already noticed it's quite a small pillion seat, so I think if your pillion is slightly bigger than average, then that may not be overly comfortable. And the luggage they sell with the bike is only 25 litres on each pannier, so that's not exactly cavernous. They also, you can get a magnetic tank bag, which I'm never particularly fond of. I've had a few instances where they scratch the tank when they move, but there is modular luggage which you can fit on the rear pillion seat. I suspect if you want a tour on this bike, it's probably better solo than two up, unless it's literally a weekend away. In terms of comfort on the bike, you could ride this bike all day. It's absolutely effortless. Ergonomics, as I've just said, are really good. Switch gear is really comfortable, and it's definitely a good high-speed cruiser. Having done the dual carriageway, time for another coffee break and some fuel, and I made my way towards Kingsley Cafe. Now, the fencing on the left-hand side as we go through here, this is Ensham by the way, and is actually a park and ride which was built by the Oxfordshire County Council. This one always makes me chuckle as I ride past it, because they spent £51 million building a car park, but they forgot to actually, or ran out of funds to cover the access to the main road, so it's completely redundant. A laugh, I nearly bought a round. But anyway, back in the real world, we should talk about fuel economy. And the bike does apparently 44 miles to the gallon. I got 40 on the trips that I had, with fairly unenthusiastic use in the main because of the conditions. If I owned it, I think it would be low 30s. And once you got used to it and began to really enjoy its capability, at 40 miles per gallon, when I filled it, it said it would do 155 miles on the computer calculator. I suspect you'd be looking for fuel about 120. I think whilst we're talking about fueling, I did point out in the specifications about there was very little room in the tank to get the nozzle in, and that is actually a criticism of the bike, because you have to trickle it in. If you try and put it in too quickly, you'll end up wearing more than you'll actually getting into the tank. Don't ask me how I know, but fortunately I carry a soft crosser with it. I managed to sort of clear it up, but that's a small criticism, but it is a real world criticism, because one thing you have to do with bikes like this is put a lot of fuel in them. So it's a bit of a shame really, because I've got so many things, little things, really right. This, sadly, isn't one of them. So, having refueled both coffee and petrol, I then made the last leg home. These last sort of few miles are always the time when I reflect on a bike as I ride it, and it's a road I know, and I was pleased to see it was actually dry, and I think that's a bit of blue sky there. So I did sort of enjoy this last little bit. Thinking about it, what impressed me about the bike is it's surprisingly secure in the wet, which I didn't expect for a bike of this type. It is exceptionally comfortable, which I did expect. It can cruise all day, both slowly, bobbling along, be nice and pleasant, good fun, but also it can cruise quickly and would be comfortable. It is, of course, a rocket in a straight line. As I've said earlier, it's a 145 mile an hour bike, and with this engine and torque, I mean, it is hilarious. It's a proper bit of kit. I think for a cruiser, you can hustle this thing along. It does turn in better in the sports mode, as I mentioned earlier, and it is pretty firm. but overall I liked it. I think it's a good bike. As you can tell, I enjoyed the bike. One of the things I do if I think I'm got a chance of actually having a review on one personally is that I avoid reading other people's reviews on it until I finish. So I was quite keen, the minute I'd sort of got it all to video and collected my thoughts, well, let's go and see what Bike Magazine thought of it, because they've got a little summary at the back there where they have a brief synopsis of what they think the bike is. Now, they haven't actually tested this one. They tested last year's bike, which was a mere 165 brake horsepower, so obviously nowhere near as good as this one. But what did they make of it? Well, they described it as huge motor is amazing, handling is ridiculous, but firm ride and sheer bulk limited as a real GT, i.e. Grand Tourer. I agree with that. That feels very close to the conclusions that I sort of come to. They actually tested the 3R as well, and they said cruiser, hardly. With a stiff chassis, handling and crazy grunt, the R is a Mad Max super naked. Well, super naked, Roadster, hypercruiser, it's sort of all of those things, and I think it's the better for it. I like the fact that you can buy a bike that looks like this, you can cruise on it, but you can actually have fun as well. I think it's a little bit limited in its touring capability, capacity for two-up and various other things, but I can certainly see why people would be tempted to buy one of these. They're great fun. My thanks, as always, to Premier Bikes for letting me very generously ride their monster out and about in the British weather. It was very generous of them. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. If you did, you might be kind enough to press like or even consider subscribing. But as always, what's most important is that you ride safe and you stay well.